channel, and what I'd like to do is walk you through some of the work that I've been doing on cosmology of light. And the idea is that over the course of the next few months, I'll spend some time every day going through some of these summary pieces that I've created that actually are based on a more elaborate 10-book series on cosmology of light. So there are some contextual blog posts on cosmology of light, and perhaps what I'll do over the next few weeks to begin with is go over each of these so that you get a sense for the range and the applicability of cosmology of light. To give you a quick sense, this Medium blog post that I've been writing essentially from February this year, February because February was the month that I finished my 10th book in the Cosmology of Light series, where I was seeking to essentially mathematize the power of light in a series of books. So I created a mathematical framework for trying to express why light has power. Because not only in scientific realms, not only in technological realms, but also in personal development realms or organizational development realms, light can be used quite effectively to make changes, and that's something of what I would like to go over in these live sessions as to why light has this power. So here I've got a number of contextual blog posts. There's one summary blog post called Doorway and Possibilities in a Cosmology of Light. And then there is an overview of the first 6-book series that lay out the essential framework of a cosmology of light. Then there's an additional 4-book series and a summary of that, in which I use the framework that I developed to look at some very contemporary issues or developments in science and technology, such as quantum computing, genetics, artificial intelligence, and transhumanism. And so I'll go over a brief summary of that. I also have a piece on essentially my journey, a very personal journey that began when I was a child. So I would say about, as far as I can remember, about 5 or 6 years old. And I'll share some aspects of that. There's a TEDx talk I recently did at Beacon Street, and perhaps we can view that together with some commentary. But really the meat of this and what I want to get to is these blog posts that I have been writing every week that essentially take nuggets out from the 10-book series and try and elaborate those nuggets in non-mathematical terms. So if we go over some of the titles here, there's something called Light's Native State, where my essential point of view is that light essentially exists at infinite speed, and that's its native state. And everything else is a derivation from that. So when we talk about light traveling at 186,000 miles per second, which is the constant speed that we've measured in vacuum in our universe, that's a derivation from light's native state, and I'll talk about why that's important, and then subsequently go over some issues related to this point of view that light's native state is where it travels infinitely fast. And essentially, if we have a quick view of this, we can see that I've got blog posts around the basis of existence, quanta and the Big Bang. So in my point of view, the Big Bang itself is caused by light projecting itself at a slower speed, and I'll go over why I think that's the case. Why light traveling at a constant speed of c is an intentionality, meaning it's really important in the scheme of things. Go over the emergence of time and matter that to me emerged from light. and then go over the basis of Einstein's theory of relativity from the point of view of light, and essentially work out or ground in non-mathematical terms this astounding point of view that light that exists at a native state of 186, or rather infinitely fast, um, why it comes to 186,000 miles per second, and how we need to rethink quantum computation, how we need to reinterpret phenomena like entanglement and superposition, the origin and possibilities of genetics, look more deeply at what space-time, energy, gravity mean, and then look at, in more detail, the electromagnetic spectrum, look at the quantum particle, look at the basis of atoms from the point of view of light, the basis of bosons that are a subcategory of quantum particles from the point of view of light, the basis of molecular plans in any cell, which is the basis of all living forms, and then also look at things like expansion and contraction dynamics of the cosmos, and then emerge into the human being, which in my point of view is also a light-based causality, and then get into some very practical issues on management of organizations, no matter how complex it might be, based on being, choice, and power. Look at the basis of complex adaptive systems from the point of view of light, and then the importance of culture. The culture piece I just finished a couple of days ago, but the idea is that I'll update these, I'll write something new every week, and essentially each of these pieces will then become a separate module for those who are interested to go much more deeply into what light is, what its potentiality is, what its impact can be on today's world. So that's a quick summary, and I'm going to just end there for now. So thank you. Today in this spontaneous live stream, I'm going to introduce very briefly these 6 books that I wrote that form the foundation for a cosmology of light. The books are A Story of Light, which is a non-mathematical book. The second book in this series is called Oceans of Innovation, where the basic math is suggested that relates one layer of light to another. There's a third book called Emergence that then follows the journey from the Big Bang to a sustainable global civilization, where we have essentially deep properties of light interacting with each other, and this book works out or displays some of the mathematics involved in that journey from the Big Bang to sustainable global civilization. We have a fourth book called Quantum Certainty, which in fact I wanted to play off the notion of quantum uncertainty to say that in fact there is a certainty at the quantum level, and there's a mathematics involved by which some of this evolution or this journey from the Big Bang to a sustainable global civilization happens quite concretely through a play of different possibilities. And here I just display or suggest a foundation for this phenomena of quantum certainty in mathematical terms. There's a fifth book that I call Supermatter that essentially leverages off this notion of an unending journey and suggests that the matter that we experience right now is only an intermediate state. And through this arbitration that takes place between different layers of light and this notion of quantum certainty, there's a different kind of matter that can in fact evolve, and it's inevitable that it will. And there's a summary book called Cosmology of Light that essentially integrates the notions of matter, life, history, civilization, universe, and self, and summarizes the findings of or the suggestions of the previous 5 books in this volume that's also mathematical in nature. Now, what I hope to do during these live streams is go into some details into each of these books, but today I'm going to perhaps spend just a few minutes to go back to this book called A Story of Light. And very simply, there's a brief description of it over here. It's a one paragraph description, and I'm going to read a couple of lines and just elaborate on it so we get a sense for what this story of light is about. So if I read, it says, A Story of Light explores a journey of light into more and more concrete layers of matter and life. So what I'm implying here is that this reality that we exist in, this physical reality, where we know that light travels at a speed of c in vacuum, so c being 186,000 miles per second, this is a derivative layer, and really the native state of light is a state where light exists traveling infinitely fast, and there's a certain kind of reality that we can infer if light were to travel infinitely fast. So I begin to, just through some thought experiments, consider what this reality might look like if light were traveling infinitely fast. And in subsequent live streams, I'm going to go into quite a bit more detail into what that reality might look like. So, as I suggest here in the second line, the journey begins with the slowing down of light to the speed c, which is the known speed of light in our physical universe. And this slowing down is actually fundamental to the cosmos that we experience here, because it's posited that when light slows down to c, it in fact creates this phenomena that we have termed as the Big Bang. And that's really the start of this creation of the cosmos as we know it. When light exists in its native state of being infinitely fast, then we can infer that there's infinite potentiality in that state, and so there's infinite information in that state. And when light slows down to c and creates this phenomena that we call the Big Bang, then essentially it precipitates a process by which this infinite information or potentiality can materialize. So when we look around us, we definitely experience a material universe with a vast amount of diversity. There's no two objects that are the same. And that's because there's this infinite possibility that's displaying itself materially in this realm where light travels at c. Now, in this book, A Story of Light, there's more layers of light that are considered. So we have light traveling infinitely fast that creates all potentiality. We have light traveling at c that begins the material process and in which this material diversity is experienced. But we also have a couple of layers of light that I suggested exist because mathematically, for that infinite potential to express itself materially as infinite diversity requires at least two different mathematical transformations, which I posit take place through light projecting itself at two intermediate speeds between traveling infinitely fast and traveling at the speed of c. But then also there's another projection of light where light projects itself at zero speed. So that's in fact creates a reality that's opposite to one in which light travels infinitely fast. And in this reality where light projects itself at zero speed, you can imagine that in fact you can't see anything. There's no light traveling, so everything appears as complete darkness and everything is completely fragmented and disconnected. And so it's an opposite state from this light traveling infinitely fast. So if you think about light traveling infinitely fast as being some quote unquote heaven with infinite potentiality, then light projecting itself at zero speed becomes the opposite of what we might term as a hell. And these different worlds that in fact manifest when light travels at different speeds are the basis of a cosmology. And so this is kind of like the superstructure, or the reason why I call it cosmology of light, where light is the fundamental existence, and through a play of its possibilities, it creates different worlds that then interact with each other to create this intense diversity that we experience here mathematically. I'm going to pause there, and I'll come back to this some other time. Uh, Thank you for joining me for the Cosmology of Light sessions. If you recall, this morning I had begun to introduce the 6 books that form the foundation for a cosmology of light. And I had briefly introduced what each of these books focuses on. Now, to get clear on the actual narrative or foundation that informs the story of light, I'd like to go a little more deeply into the basic premises, the basic assumptions that inform the entire work, because over the next few months and likely every day, I'm going to be speaking about this and having dialogues with people and sharing blog posts that I'm writing on an ongoing basis. And this is going to be the foundation for a lot of different work that is generated over the next few years. And if we start from the beginning and ask ourselves, what really is light? This has been one of the greatest mysteries that have basically faced us, whether we are mystics or scientists or technologists or just a person interacting with sunlight. The question is, what really is it? And if we take a step back and try and examine where light exists, then we find that anything that's immaterial or material basically has a deep signature of light inside it. And so, why do I say that? So, first of all atoms in this universe have been created in the depth of stars or in the math of supernova. And so, by definition, has a deep signature of light inside it. So, when we have atoms that create all the various things that exist both within us and without us, these have a deep signature of light inside them. And so it can be said that light already informs everything, no matter how small or how large. But further, if we think about any iota of space around us, then this too is packed with millions and millions of photons. And we know that these photons are carriers of light. But more importantly, these photons ground us in our massive light-based operating system, because they continually carry information from the surrounding environments, and this information streams into our eyes and into our brains and creates a real-time image of the world that we exist in. So at the very least, this operation of photons is grounding us in something that is basically completely light-based. And so not only are we made from light intimately at the level of atoms, but also we're connected with absolutely everything around us through this action of light. And even our sustenance derives from light. So, for instance, we know that if we trace back the process of nutrition, then no matter what the species is, we can trace it back to a simple process of photosynthesis, which relies on the light from suns. And so even our very sustenance is driven by light. So we eat light, we are light, we operate by light. And it's fair to say that if light didn't exist, we wouldn't exist. So our entire existence is synonymous or an outcome of light. And this is just by examining some basic facts of science. Now, in a story of light, I go a step further because one of the most foundational physical constants that animates our universe is the speed of light. And this speed is, we refer to it as c, and it's known to be 186,000 miles per second in vacuum. But the question is, why is it a constant speed? What's the significance of that? And what I'd like to suggest is that light being constant sets up an outer limit to what we experience physically. So we know, for instance, that it sets a bound on matter, on objects, on how fast objects can travel physically, on how large they can become, because nothing can approach the speed of light, because if it did so, it would become infinitely massive. And so that becomes a upper barrier to our existence. And it's not that light itself is limited, it's that light, the action of light, is such that it creates a limit within which we are going to operate. And I want to draw this distinction out. So light in itself, I want to propose, is absolutely infinite. And it projects itself at this speed of c, and this is a very significant physical constant. And through that action of projecting itself at c, it creates a limit to what is materially possible, or how even the dynamics of matter work. And this is something that I believe is intentional. Now, if we, for instance, if I were to take a scenario where light were to travel infinitely fast, which, by the way, I believe is its native state. Light natively travels infinitely fast. So what does that mean? If we consider any volume, then we know that within that volume, if light were to travel infinitely fast, it's going to be instantaneously present everywhere, which means that there's going to be this property of omnipresence. So light's going to be present in every iota of that volume instantaneously. If anything not of the nature of light arises, it's going to be subsumed or overcome by the nature of light, and therefore a light is omniscient or all-powerful in that space. Further, since everything is connected in the nature of light, there's this deep basis of harmony which is the foundation in which everything else arises. And then also, since everything is or exists in this fabric of light, then anything that arises or anything that settles or disappears is instantaneously recorded in this fabric of light. And so light has an omniscience, or knows everything that's happening in its space. So we end up with these four properties that we can hypothesize exist in this space where light travels infinitely fast. And space is not the right word, but exist when light travels infinitely fast. And again, summarizing, it's omniscience, omnipotence, omnipresence, and something that we call perhaps omniharmony or omninurturing. And these are very significant fourfold properties that are intimate with the nature of light. So in a story of light, really what we're doing is we're trying to see what's the inherent nature of light that exists, before it projects itself at C and creates an outer bound for this material adventure that we currently are in. Now, significantly in a story of light, these four properties, which I'll simplify. So, omnipresence, we can just say it's something that we can call presence, it's present everywhere. Omniscience is something we call knowledge. So, there's kind of a knowledge that exists in light. The omniharmony or omni-nurturance, let's just call it harmony. So, there's kind of a harmony that exists in light. And then there's this omnipotence, which is a power. So we have these four properties of presence, knowledge, power, and harmony that are intimate with the nature of light. And as light projects itself at slower and slower speeds, then these four properties will go through some kind of transformation. So they'll remain in their essence what they are, but we will begin to perceive them differently because of the way and light is appearing or existing for us. So it's almost like this lens, and as the lens changes, then what we see also changes. So even though it's the same thing, it's light in its essence with its fourfold properties, yet they appear differently to us. And if we consider this plane where light travels at the speed of 186,000 miles per second, then we know for a fact that there's infinite diversity. There's a vast material play that we're a part of. No two faces are alike when you look at it in great detail. No two thumbprints are alike. No two snowflakes are alike. There's everything is absolutely different, and there's a uniqueness. And if we think about light in its native state of traveling infinitely fast, and we have these properties of omnipresence, omnipotence, omniscience, and omniharmony, then essentially what we're saying is that there is infinite information that exists at this level, and so there's infinite possibility, there's infinite potential. And when light projects itself at slower speed, then this infinite potential begins to materialize. So how or why does it materialize? So you may have heard of this very significant other constant that exists in the physical universe, which is Planck's constant. And the way that I would interpret Planck's constant is that, certainly one way to think about it is that it's almost like the inverse of the speed of light. So it's something that's very, very small, but it really defines a kind of process of packetization, or a process by which information or energy has to contain itself before it can express what it really is. And that is the basis of all matter. So if light's traveling infinitely fast, and we say that h, or Planck's constant, is an inverse of that, then essentially the inverse of infinity is going to be zero. And so you wouldn't have any kind of materialization in a realm like that. But as light slows down to, say, 186,000 miles per second, then h takes on a finite value. And because of that finiteness, energy and information can hold itself in packets that then become meaningful and become the basis of all materialization. And so, we can also see from this point of view that if light were to project itself at a speed, say, way, 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 way faster than c, then you would have an h that's way, 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 way smaller than h at this realm. And so materialization would be different. There would be another process of materialization, perhaps where this infinite information that exists at light in its infinite state begins to express itself in a large field. And if light projects itself even slower, but yet at a speed quite a bit faster than c, then we can even see that that would be the basis of a materialization that was wave-like. So simply from this point of view of thinking about the speed of light and taking its inverse, we can see what the dynamics or mechanics are by which we have a quadrality that comes into place. So we have a massive block that exists where light travels infinitely fast, where it informs everything. Then as light slows down a little bit, you have fields that are created, and it slows down further, you have waves that are created. And then when it hits a speed of c, that's the basis of matter as we understand it. So we can see that mathematically there's a kind of a process of rationalization where light precipitates at three different levels, and that creates, in a sense, this material foundation. And each of these worlds that I'll go into in more detail at a later point essentially has a different reality that in essence is the same, but it appears different because there's a transformation, because we're viewing the same thing from a different lens. And because we're viewing it from a different lens, we see something different about it. So it's like looking at, for example, if we look up at the night sky and try and view something with our eyes, and then we use a telescope to view it, or use a particular kind of telescope that is sensitive to different wavelengths of light, we're going to perceive things differently. So it's the same thing here, that when light projects itself at slower speed, we're beginning to interact with the reality that light represents in a different way. And so therefore, our experience of it is going to be different, and that creates a different experience of what reality might be like, even though it really is in essence the same reality, but we're perceiving it differently. It appears different. It is different because the materialization process is different, but it's all due to an action of these lenses caused by light traveling at slower and slower speed. Now, this action of light traveling at a slower and slower speed is what I would say is the basis of the idea of having a cosmology of light. Because in a cosmology of light, it's a cosmology because different worlds or different realities all emanate from this fundamental action of light slowing down. And as we'll see as we go further and further into this material, that at the physical level, there's a massive simultaneity, there's a massive interrelationship between these different layers of light that create the reality that we experience fundamentally as material beings living in this material world. I had made the point in a previous live cast that the Big Bang is in fact due to light precipitating or slowing down to a speed of 186,000 miles per second. But let's think through this a little more deeply based on the analysis that we just went through of h, or Planck's constant. Now, when light slows down to 186,000 miles per second, and if h is inversely proportional to light, then there's a basis, or there's the possibility that because it has now a finite value, no matter how small it might be, but that allows energy to accumulate, it allows matter to be formed, and this process of the accumulation of information or energy that suddenly materializes is how the Big Bang comes into being. So it's all of a sudden from something that seems empty when light slows down, then you've got all this information that's precipitating in material form, and therefore you have the basis of what we can call the Big Bang. So in a cosmology of light, in any cosmology, we really have to view what's the process of creation, what's the process of change, of transformation, of evolution. Is there some kind of end goal, or what are the dynamics between the different parts of the existence within that cosmology? And if all that fits together, we can call it a cosmology. And so I want to propose that there is a very coherent cosmology that can be based on light. And that really is what we're going to explore, this coherent cosmology that can integrate many different points of view, even in the material realm. So, from the scientific point of view, from the technological point of view, from the mystical point of view, from a spiritual point of view, from a practical point of view of managing, of organizations, of economies, there's kind of a common thread. There's a common basis that we can see very clearly when we consider light to be the foundation for all existence. Now, in the absence of this, if we don't really see light to be the foundation, then perhaps we won't come up with such a comprehensive cosmology. And therefore, I think it's worth really trying to explore what existence is with light as its foundation. Now, just going to this, back to this blog post. Remember, here, this is part of a Cosmology of Light blog post, and I have one particular blog post that examines the six-book foundation. And here, what we're doing is we're just looking at the essential narrative that informs the story of light. And if we read through it, we see a story of light. I'm reading the first line here. A story of light explores a journey of light into more and more concrete layers of matter and life. And so that's exactly the process that I had just gone through, where light precipitates and the value of H or Planck's constant changes, and therefore you have subtle realm becoming more and more material. Second line, the journey begins with the slowing down of light to C, which is posited to have resulted in a big bang from which the process of the creation of the layers of matter began. So what is this process of the creation of layers of matter? So once the Big Bang occurs, it's not that all of matter and all of civilization suddenly pops up. There's a progressive process by which subtle layers of matter are first laid out and these become more and more material. So for instance, we have, and here it's not mentioned, but in my further work and the further books that I wrote, it became clearer to me that space-time energy gravity itself is an emergence from light, and I'll go over why. And so perhaps that is the first kind of layer that's created, the space-time energy gravity, which not only acts at a micro level, but also at a macro level. And I want to posit that anything that becomes a quote-unquote law, so whether it's how an electromagnetic field functions, or it's how quantum particles work, or it's how atoms work, or it's how molecular plans and cells work, the logic of that has to be recorded in a space-time energy gravity script. And this script makes up both a container at the micro and macro level. At the macro level, it becomes space-time energy gravity that we experience at a cosmic or universal level. At the micro level, I want to posit that there's a container around every little existence that comes into being that has space-time energy gravity script behind it. And this space-time energy gravity script, we can recognize further when cellular beings come into play, and then when plants and animals and humans come into play. They're recorded in genetics. So I want to propose that there's a fourfold kind of script that's space-time energy gravity based that actually is a parallel to the whole discovery of genetics. And so I wrote a book called The Origin and Possibilities of Genetics, which has this idea as its basis. But just starting off, if we go through these layers, we have space-time energy gravity that emerges when this precipitation and the Big Bang occurs. And then we have the electromagnetic field that comes into being. And I would actually elaborate that even the electromagnetic spectrum is a fourfold spectrum. It's not just electron, it's not magnetic, but we'll go into that in more detail as well. And then you've got quantum particles that we know by the study of the standard model is also a fourfold structure. So you've got quarks, leptons, bosons, and the Higgs boson that I'll categorize as four different kind of fundamental elements of quantum particles. And then when we think about atoms, we know there's 108 known atoms in the universe, and these are structured into four categories. And these are called the S shell, P shell, D shell, and F shell categories. And again, there's a fourfoldness there. And then when we come into actual cells, living cells, there's four molecular plans that inform all living cells. And these are that of proteins, nucleic acids, polysaccharides, and lipids. And the astounding thing is that all of these fourfold architectures that come into being, I want to propose, and I'll show also why and how, and I've written about this extensively and suggested the mathematics for it, but I want to propose that they all emanate from the four properties of light that we started off with. So these properties of power, knowledge, presence, and harmony are in fact what architects, or these are the organizational principles that actually create all the layers of matter from subtle to more and more material. But it doesn't stop there. Even so, when we have a human being in play, then the complex organizations that are human based, so whether they're economic organizations or not for profit, or if they're larger economies, or if they're a nation or a country or even a civilization, then again there's a fourfoldness that animates that, and that all comes from these four properties that we find express themselves in light and are, in this point of view, fundamental to what light is. So, we come back to that mystery, what really is light? And light to me is this incredible foundation which has in it all this information that is even categorized into four aspects. And these four aspects, when they materialize, they create everything around us. So the action of light materializing is what creates the complexity of this life that we exist in. And that becomes very significant, because if we see that, then there's a different way to manage what's happening around us, or a different way to understand what's happening around us. And that's the point of a cosmology of light, is that there's a cohesive framework where we can see, perhaps who we are, what we are in potentiality. We can certainly see what our past has been in terms of this fourfoldness. We can project what our future might be in terms of this fourfoldness, or how, if we want a sustainable future, we have to think about the complexification of this fourfoldness that started off very simply when light first began to materialize, but becomes more and more complex as forms emerge that are complex. But there's this fourfoldness that architects it, that anchors it, and that has to be, in a sense, kind of adhered to for this play of cosmos to reach a fruitfulness. But we'll see that as we go further and further. So, with that, I want to say that that summarizes the key ideas in a story of light, but also with one more important idea, and that is that since light exists deeply within us, since we are made fundamentally from light, then we have access to this very mysterious full thing that has created everything. And if we learn to consciously interact with it, interrelate with it, then the nature of our life can change in very pleasant, beautiful ways. And so that too is a fundamental theme or idea in a cosmology of light. There's no point, in my point of view, there's no point just having a cosmology unless it gives us an insight into how to operate better within it. And I want to propose that that a deeper understanding of light gives us a tremendous power and ability to interact with this thing that we exist in, or this container that we exist in ways that we cannot fathom, but we will begin to fathom as we go further and further into this exploration of light.